red men. We like to sit and chew and fish, tell stories. Anyway, we went down there and we was fishing and we wasn't getting a bite. They wouldn't bite at all. Well, the first thing you know, John looked down and there come a snake crawling up through there. And that snake had a frog in his mouth. By gosh, he's headed right for John, and John reached down and he grabs that snake. He takes that frog away from the snake, and of course going to use it for bait. Well, just happened, John had a fifth of whiskey, or a pint, I guess it was, in his hip pocket. He takes that pint of whiskey, and he pours some of that whiskey down that snake's mouth. He turns that old snake loose, and I'm telling you, that snake was gone. Man, he went. But we went ahead of fishing there, and the first thing you know, John kept feeling something hitting him back. He looked around, and you know that snake had another frog. Well, I got another cement or railroad story or two, but I'll tell that later. So I'll turn it over to John. The main thing is we need to learn a little something about the steam locomotives and well, steam engines themselves. John?
I don't know how you're ever going to follow this act. Chatty's covered about everything I was going to talk about. But I had a joke on plumbing, but I can't tell it right now. I like to see so many of you people are here today and learn about steam engines. I don't think they could get this many people interested in gas engines. But I would like to say one thing about our old friend Trigo and Big Mac. I don't know if you hear me all right. Big Mac, he was a case man. Trigo was advance. They didn't come to blows any time that I can remember, but they damn near did. Mac, he didn't have any use for any engine but a case. And I'm just like him. I did own a Nichols and Shepherd, but I was lucky to get rid of it. Ivan Burns bought it. No, that isn't the case. That was a good engine. Ivan, don't get mad now. I like cases, but I did one time almost get converted to a Keck Gunnerman. Chatty Atterbury had a big move at his barn one time down to another barn. We moved, I forget where. Moved down to Lyman's, I think, didn't we? And that Keck Gunnerman, there's a young fella here, is a Wolf, not Wolf, that's
Steve Dunn.
Steve Dunn owns it now, yeah. That is a good engine. We had that engine pulling Mr. Wolf's big gas tractor and that old Advance, wasn't it? Behind it. And that was a good load. We carried 160 pounds of steam, and if you lost 5 pounds of steam, you stopped. You died. It just plumb stopped. With 155 pounds of steam, it wouldn't go. But we had good coal. Chatty was running the engine. He knew how to run it, and I fired it. And that's another thing I want to talk to you a little bit about is firing an engine. That's one thing Chatty didn't quite cover. Now, anything I say here today is not necessarily opinions of the Oklahoma Steam Thrashers Association. I got ideas of my own, or the Kansas boiler laws. Either one. I don't agree with all that, but I'm getting converted a little bit. I've heard of engines with pipe plugs in the crown sheet, like Chatty had said. Welded even shot, some of them. And that is dangerous. If that soft plug doesn't give away, and even if it does, it's still dangerous. But it can save you. And if you don't watch your water, or know where your water's at, in the boiler, it can put you in hell and a lot of people with you. And you're the only one that really deserves to go there. The Kansas boiler laws are tough, as Tom Turning tomorrow will tell you. I haven't got my engine inspected yet. I'm scared. I have a 6-horse portable case. But we had a sale a few years back, well, last year, I think, in Kansas, of a 65-horse case. I knew the engine well, and I helped flue it. And I knew it was a good engine. But they wouldn't let me fire it up the day of the sale. Between the lawyer and the Kansas boiler inspector, they wouldn't let me fire it up. They told me I'd go to jail or whatever. So I didn't fire it up. And the man that bought it is here today, Mr. Litke. You want to stand up, Glenn? Yeah, he bought the engine, and he agrees it's a good engine. But it was a late 65, 1916, I believe, 17. And it was a good engine. Another thing I don't agree on, and Chatty, I think, didn't quite say it, but butt strap or lap seam boilers. It isn't a lap seam boiler that's going to blow up. It's the guy running the engine that's going to blow it up. Lap seam boilers are just as, my notion, just as good as, it's not going to give away in the seam, it's going to give away in the crown sheet if you let it get low on water. If I could impress anything on you today, or you remembered anything about it, that's one thing I'd tell you about is water. Chatty covered it very good, but I want to just say a couple words, with your permission. By the way, I told John Walters I got a guy at the door, he don't let nobody out till I'm through. So, captive audience. But there was a Frisco engine about 1916, 10 years before I was born, 9 years before I was born. They had a coal car on behind the tender, and the coal car was to be spotted on the coal chute, which was an incline. It went up in the air, and they had the engine, they backed the engine in with pushing the coal car, and they backed up on that ramp. The rule was that they should have 2 cars ahead of the coal car so the engine could stay on the level. That engine backed up just like this engine did at Fairview they talk about this morning. Backed up on the ramp and bared the crown sheet. Bared the crown sheet. No water on it. Okay, when that engine comes down, when that engine came down, and it was just too much for the soft plug or whatever, it hit that cold water or the hot water, hit that bare crown sheet. It got red hot while it was waiting up there. The switchman was slow to get the car uncoupled. He come down that ramp and the engine exploded, killed 2 men. That was right in Wichita, Kansas, just east of the depot, the Union Depot. Now, another thing that happened, if you go in the ditch with your front wheels and can't get out, pull your fire. Get your fire out of that engine. Your water has went off the crown sheet. Good bar ditch. Get that there fire pulled out of that engine. There's where a clinker hook comes in. Get in there and pull that fire, knock it down, open your grates if you got rocker grates. Get the fire down in the ash pan, and don't move. Just let her sit there till somebody. Because if you bare that crown sheet, it could be dangerous. We went on the ground over here. Some of you know, 2 years ago, I think. Our front drivers went on what we call on the ground. They slipped off the rails. The front end of the engine went down. Our water disappeared in the glass. So I told firemen, I said, pull the fire, drop the fire. I didn't know where the water was. I know he'd been firing it, and I didn't pay any attention because he's a good fireman. I don't worry. I look at the water, yeah, occasionally, but this particular evening we'd been up to Kentis and come back down, going to make one more trip. Some kid stuck a spike in the frog over there. At least that's what we think happened. Okay, we went on the ground, and the water was out of sight, so we pulled the fire. And Martin's got us back on with their winch truck, pulled us back in about an hour, and we fired up again. The water showed up then. But the ground sheet had cooled to somewhat, and it didn't hurt anything, you see. That's what I'm trying to get across. Watch your water. Like Chatty put again, I'll say it just in short way. You got two valves on your gauge cocks, on your water glass. I never use the gauge cocks. If you open them, they start leaking. They're a nuisance. And I've opened them when the glass broke in an engine. I've opened them, tried to use them. I couldn't tell where the water was no more than I could tell if it looked all the same to me, water and steam. But we pulled the fire, and then you're safe. Gauge cocks is what I'm going to talk about now a minute, just a second. The case gauge cock, to me, not gauge cock, water glass, I'm talking about, I'm getting off, is the safest water glass valve that there is. If you ever had a case engine and took that valve out, there's a paddle on there, on the late cases, a paddle on the end of your stem. At least there was on my 40 and 65. And that keeps you from gumming up, liming up, or any corrosion gets in there, that stops that. That's a good feature. I've never seen that on another engine. That's why I really like case engines. I think they're great. But that's my opinion. I know there's Fort Huron men here and there in Advance, but like I said, my opinions are mine. I can't help it. The only other thing I'd like to talk about just a minute that Chatty didn't maybe is on a railroad, on a locomotive. I'm supposed to talk on the locomotive, but I know a lot of you aren't interested in the locomotive. But is the reverse gear. Now your case engine, I believe, is a Wolf reverse gear on the case. On a locomotive out here, standing down here, this Porter, it's a Stevenson, what this model shows. There's four eccentrics on the axle that actuate the motion of the valve. Some engines have a Baker valve gear. Your motion is derived from a crank on the drive wheel, and it works the same thing as these eccentrics do on the crank or on the axle. Steam, like Chatty had told you earlier, if you remember, expands. It's a wonderful quality of the steam. I don't think anything else does that. To save steam, a good fireman takes that, or a good engineer can almost control what the fireman's doing by his doing. The way he runs the engine, the way he runs the Johnson bar. The Johnson bar is that little lever, not little on an engine, but that lever that we make it go this way or that way, back or forth, reverse lever on your traction engine. That can be hooked up, we call it. In other words, it can be moved to the center, towards center, and that way you cut off the steam at a shorter or a faster pace, faster. You cut off your steam into your cylinder. What are you doing then? You're saving steam, not? And then, while that piston is still traveling, that steam's expanding, pushes that. Nothing lost. Speed. That's where you get speed. And you save a lot of time and energy. Steam. firing, I want to mention that. I got a little ahead of myself here, but I like to fire an engine in a trough. One time I got